Hi all, welcome to ESI Cloud Trainings. My name is Shalini Nerella. Let's get started with Boomi Atomsphere Basic Training Day 4 session. The agenda plan for today is we'll go through the process lifecycle, the deploy tab, atom management tab, and process reporting tab. We'll trigger a process, we'll schedule a process, and we'll see how licenses are consumed. And with an example, we'll see how we can minimize the licenses. Right? So let's get started. So far when we execute a process, we see that we execute it from here, which means you are executing the process in test mode. But test mode has a limitation that it allows only 100 documents and 10 MB of data. But in real time, you see that thousands of documents, lakhs of documents flowing through, right? In that case, what we'll have to do, we have to deploy the process. We have to deploy the process and execute from there. So deploy page allows you to attach one or more atoms to a specific process and also to deploy your latest revision of process. If you want your process to be available behind the firewall, you'll have to first deploy the process, right? So say now I want to deploy this process FTP to disk integration. So see here attached environments, they are null. So how I can attach an environment? From here. See here attached environments 0. Here we have the unattached environment. So what an environment is, so environment gives you greater control over your change management and support different connection configuration using extensions. So say in real time you will be having test environment, stage environment, production environment, so there will be different environments for us. So these environments allow you to have different change management, so you can have different connection configurations across these environments, right? So here if I have to create this environment, where I can do that? So for creating an environment, I'll go to atom management under manage tab. So go to atom management. So in atom management you can review and modify the properties and settings for atoms, molecules, and environments, right? So see here, this is how the atom management page looks like. So you can first go and create an environment. You can create an atom from here or an environment from here. So you can go and create an environment. When you create an environment, it asks you for the environment classifications, whether it is production environment or test environment. So why we have this classification like this? So production environment consumes production licenses, whereas your test environment consumes test licenses. So the test licenses are usually cheaper than production, and they have certain limitations that like mail notifications cannot be sent. Like this is usually used for your testing purposes, test environments. So now I'll give a name to this environment. I'll say Shalini environment. Usually in real time we'll be having like your test environment, dev environment, production environment. So they'll you'll have to name with your different environments, right? So I've created one environment with my name. So now if you click on here, you'll be having environment ID, the classification, roles, attachments. So here you see choose atoms to attach. So here it will display all the atoms that are available and you'll have to select one atom. So just by attaching that atom, so this is the atom that I'll have to attach to. So let me delete this. So how I can delete an atom out from the environment? So just by clicking on here, right? Now I have to choose this atom. So that's the reason we need to give meaningful atom names to differentiate. So this is the atom that has been attached to. Okay. So now here we have environment extensions. We'll look into that later, and delete an environment. If you want, you can delete it from here. And if you want to change the environment name, you can change it from here, right? And now this is the atom that we attached, and atom, you can see the atom information like the atom ID, type atom, status online. So if it is offline, it shows you red. So the see here, this is red and which is offline. So which means the atom is not anymore communicating with the data center. So as I told in day one session, the atom sends heartbeat to data center. For every very frequently it sends data, the heartbeat. And if the data center doesn't uh, get the information after certain time, it shows the atom as offline, which means the atom is not sending any data, right? The host name, where it is installed, date installed, extensions last updated, version, RSS monitor feed, RSS alerts only feed. We'll discuss about this detail in later sessions. Clear detailed atom status information, detach from environment, delete atom, restart atom. So if you want to restart your atom, you can restart from here as well, right? Startup properties, atom architecture. So this gives you atom architecture, atom time zone. This is very important. Atom time zone, where it is, maximum RAM available, directory free space. So all related information to atom will be shown up here. The log files, atom logs, AS2 artifacts, MLLP artifacts, shared server logs. So these are different log files. We'll discuss in detail about this in later sessions. Deployed processes. So if you deploy any process, the list will be shown here. So these are the listeners. We'll discuss about all this in detail in later sessions, right? So also we discussed about release control window. Remember in the first class we discussed about release control window. So every month we'll be having releases, Boomi releases every month. So you can schedule when you want those release controls on, so onto your atom, whether it is never first week, last week. So like this you can schedule certain time for your atom to automatically update, right? So now deployed processes are zero here because now we created an environment. We'll go to deploy tab and we'll attach the environment to the process, attach the atom to the process. So now if I click on day 2, you'll see that environment Shalini is created. Attach this environment and say deploy latest revision of processes. So it is always good to give a deployment notes. First deployment. So whenever you modify something and if you're deploying it, it's better to mention the change here. And this is deployed. Say you have modified something in your process, you modified and you want to deploy this back. So you can go here and say deploy latest revision of processes. So you can deploy latest revision of processes. And you see here, you can see different options. Redeploy this version. So you can redeploy this version. So now this will create new version as 3 and will have the same components which were there in this deploy in this version. Compare deployment. You can compare this deployment. So choose a revision. Say in real time what happens, you'll have test environment and once it is completely tested in test environment, you are moving it to production. So before moving it to production, it's better you compare the versions with the previous deployed version in production to see what changes are done. So now see this is version 1 I'm comparing with. Right now because there are no changes, it doesn't show anything. But if there are any changes, they'll be displayed in yellow. If there are any deletions to the components, they are highlighted in orange. Right? So that is about compare deployment. You can copy this deployment. So real time, when you're moving from test to production environment, you usually copy from test environment to production environment. So you'll be saying, you'll be selecting the production environment here and say copy from test environment. It is not a good practice to deploy into production directly from the build page. When you're copying, when you go to production environment and say deploy latest revision, you are not taking it from the test environment. You are directly deploying it from the build page. So the changes, anyone can add any changes to that process, and that will end up in failing in production. So it is always a good practice to deploy from test environment to production environment by using copy deployment. So this is usually asked interview question. How do you deploy deploy a process from your test environment to production environment? Okay. View component deployments. So it gives you the deployment components here with the revision number, modified by and modified date as well. And copy to component explorer. If you want this version to be copied to component explorer to here, you can say copy to component explorer, and you can give the destination folder. So it will copy this version of process to that component explorer, right? So now we have our process copied and it is deployed, right? So now if I go to atom management page here, also you see here something called view deployment. So see this is under day 2 folder, right? So if I click on view deployment, this directly takes me to the deploy page, and I can deploy saying deploy latest revision. So that was one update that was done recently. So now we have deployed the process. Now if I go to atom management page, see here, earlier this was empty and now you can see the deployed processes here, right? So now if I go and click here, you can execute the process. You can trigger the process from here. You can stop the schedules, edit process properties, right? So let me first execute the process. So now this process is executed. Now to see the status of my process execution, whether it is successful or failure, I'll have to go to the process reporting tab. In process reporting tab, I can see the logs, the time, execution time, whether it is success or failure, all that can be shown on process reporting page. So see here, this has been executed. So here you'll have the timestamp. This is the timestamp, documents in, documents out, atom, and execution type is manual execution. I now manually executed it. Else it can be scheduled execution as well. So there are different types of executions. We'll be discussing them. Also, here you'll see the start shape, the different shapes. So earlier, if you remember in test mode, when we executed this, we discussed about component logs and process logs. Remember? So we discussed that these are called as component logs. And if I go click here, I'll be able to see process logs. Similarly, here, if I go and click here, these are component logs for me. So I can see the component logs here, right? And for the process logs, if I go here, you can see view process logs from here. So these are the view process logs. Also, I have a shape here. So if I click on that, it will show you the process log, right? So these are the process log. If you have any error, if you want to debug it, you can download these logs and check where the issue is. So here under actions, I can see view process logs, view process. So I can directly click on view process and it goes to the build page. View deployment components, view process state. So it gives you the process state, which shape has executed after which shape and how much time it has taken. So clearly it gives you the process state details. So these all helps you in debugging your error. View extended information. So everything has an ID here as we discussed earlier. So execution ID, process ID, atom ID, deployment ID. So everything will have an ID. So if there is any error and you want to report that error to the Boomi support team, if you want to get help from them, or if you want to get help from anyone regarding this execution, you need to first share your execution ID. So if you share your execution ID, it will be easy to identify this particular execution. See here, I copied this execution ID and I'll say add filter. And if I give this execution ID, only this particular execution ID will be shown to me. So this way, usually Boomi support team helps the team if there are any issues. All right. So it's about timestamp. This is the process, and this symbol is for the manual execution. And actions. So as we've seen, view process, view deployment components, view process state, view extended information. So the same information what we have seen here will also be available here. These are the process logs, atom name, the number of documents, incoming documents and outgoing documents, right? And the time taken. If there is any error message will be populated here. And you can also filter error processes, those processes that are errored out for debugging, pending which are still executing, and only success, right? Also you can give your time frame here, past hour, past 24 hours, past week, date range. So you can give all these filters here. So you can also add filters based on atom, process, execution IDs, hide successes with zero inbound documents, and execution modes. So under execution modes, these are the different execution modes we usually have. So this sometimes is an interview question. What are the different execution modes we have? It's good to remember this, right? So listener executions for real-time integrations, manual execution, which we have done now. So manual retry, we can also retry this process. If there is any error, you'll be having an option called retry this process. That's manual retry. Scheduled execution, if you schedule a process, you'll be able to see scheduled execution. And if you're retrying a scheduled execution, that is scheduled retry. And only sub processes, we'll discuss about sub processes, but only if sub processes. And test mode execution, so for any test mode executions this will be popped up, right? So this is how we executed a process manually. Now I can also schedule this process. So you've got a requirement that this process have to be executed every day at say 3 p.m., right? First thing you need to know is which time zone. So the client also, you need to understand from client what time they are expecting, the time zone and the time zone of this particular atom. So you have to see the time zone of this particular atom, and then you have to schedule accordingly. Now say I edit schedules, go to edit schedules, see here execution retry. So execution, if I add, you can, there are different schedule types: minute, hour, day, advance. One of the certification question. What are the different schedule types? Minute, hour, day, advanced. So minute, if you want it to be executed every minute, or at what intervals, 15 minutes. So like that you can give the time frame. Hour, so how many ones in a day? So day wise you can give. And then advanced. So any complex schedules can be provided here. So say every first of a month. So then I can just give one here, first of a month. And days of week, whether it have to only execute certain days. And hours, months, years. So the required complex scheduling can be provided here, right? So now say I want to execute it daily on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. If I want it to be daily. And start interval, start time. So I want this to be executed at say 3 p.m. So I'll go to 3 p.m. just 15. And I'll execute it. So let's see the time now. It's 3:52. Let's schedule at 3:55, or I'll schedule it 3:53. So this process is scheduled. Okay. So now you have to click on refresh. So see here auto refresh is off, which means you have to refresh this to see any new executions. If you want to on this auto refresh here, I can click here. So which means it gets refreshed by itself. Right. See here execution has started at 3:53. So like this, I can schedule my process. See, this is done. And you'll see that the difference, this is manual execution and this is scheduled execution. If you want to retry, you'll be getting, if there is any error, you'll be getting retry this process here. And when you click on that, this process will be retried. Okay. See here, you can see executions, documents, trading partners. So in process reporting page, you'll be having filters as executions, documents, and trading partners. Right. So this is about how we schedule a process in process reporting, and we see the execution. So now if I want to schedule this for every 10 minutes, right? In that case, I'll go to again edit schedules. I will say minute and I'll say start time. So among what time? So from 15, from 3 to say 17 for every 15 minutes, for example. So if I give this, this have to execute for every 15 minutes. See here, 3 to 5:59 p.m. every 15 minutes every day, right? And you see here there is something called retry. So if there is any error, how many times it have to retry, you can give that information here. So how many times it have to retry? 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And see here, schedule when this process runs on the atom. The time scheduled will run based on atom's time zone, which may not be same as the local time zone where the schedule was created. Okay, so that is very important. Also, there is something called edit process properties. You see here, edit process properties. So when you first execute this process, if there is a persisted process property, then you'll be able to see that value here. Say for example, I have created a process property. So set process property. So okay, I'll create a dynamic process property. Okay, so persist value, and I'll say persist this property, persist value TPP. And I've given some value to this. I'll say it as 5,000 this time. Okay, I persisted this value, right? So now I'll try to deploy this process. So I can just say redeploy this version. So I can say deploy latest revision of version, right? And now, so you see that the edit process properties before execution are these two. So as we discussed earlier, by default, Boomi captures last run date and last successful run date for us. Okay. And now if I execute this process, I have executed this process. This is executed. Now you'll see here persist value DPP. So this is how it shows here. If you want to modify the value for the next execution, you can give it here. So this is how we edit the process properties values or dynamic process properties values. Clear? So these are the values that are taking up from atom directory, right? And edit schedules, you can stop your schedules, we can execute the process. Stop all schedules, resume all schedules. So that's about scheduling, executing a process. Now, the most important concept we'll discuss about licensing. So as we discussed earlier, Boomi is pay per use, which means you'll be paying only for what you're using. So how are you actually getting charged? Got it? So how are you actually getting charged is based on the licenses. So if I go to setup tab here, right? I'll go to setup tab here. You'll see something called licensing, right? So this license page gives you the connections by class, cloud usage, API usage information. regarding the account, the API usage, the cloud usage, and the connections will be shown. Under connections by class, you have different connector classes like your small business, standard, enterprise, trading partner, and as we discussed, we have production license and test licenses, right? So you'll see here these are the test licenses and these are the production licenses. So when you purchase an account based on the number of licensing you are purchasing, you'll be charged. And test licenses are cheaper than the production licenses, right? So it shows you like what all we have used, which processes we have used, and what license are been consumed will be shown here. So see here, like all the different connectors fall into different connector classes here. So that we'll discuss in the presentation slides, which connector falls into which class, etc. And you see here by default we got 3 standard licenses. And how many of them are deployed? How many are available? And trading partners, how many are purchased and how many are available, right? And test standard licenses we had 3 and 3 are available, right? So now you remember our production, our an atom management page. Atom management page, the classification of this. So the classification of our environment is production classification. So any process deployed to this will consume production licenses for us. So now let me undeploy this process. I'll show you how I can undeploy this process. So here, undeploy the process, which means unattaching the environment. So this is undeployed. So see here, the standard purchased production licenses are 3, available are 3. Trading partner are 3 and available are 3. Standard test licenses are 3, available 3. And trading partner test licenses are 3 and available 3. Right? Now, remember that each connection deployed will consume one license. Each connection deployed will consume a license. So now we are trying to deploy this particular process, right? So how many connections does this have? So here FTP connection is 1, disk connection is 1. So if I deploy this particular process, so I'm attaching this environment and deploying the process. So now because this is already deployed, we'll see the list here. See here the list we have got, correct? Now if I refresh this, so because I have attached the environment, Shalini environment is production classification. So this have to consume production license. See here, purchase 3, deployed 2, available 1. So each connection will consume one license. Now let's see a simple example. So let me close this. I create a day 4 folder. So let me create a day 4 folder. So a simple integration, a very simple integration, disk to disk will do. Disk to disk integration, right? So here, let me start with no data. I will give disk get. So let me create one connection here. C drive demo files in folder. So this is my in folder. I'll name this as in disconnection. Okay. And operation. So just a simple operation. And I'll create one more disk and I'll name this, the action is sent, and I'll name this as out disconnection, and this is the out folder. Okay. So this is done. A stop ship. So this is my simple integration. Okay, disk to disk. Now let me create one environment, a test environment will create. Okay, this is production classification, right? So let me create an environment and I'll name this as Shalini test. And the environment classification will be test. So which means this consumes test licenses. Okay, this should consume test licenses for me. I'll for now attach test atom cloud. Also, I will attach this atom. I will detach from here and I'll attach to the test environment. So this is done, right? So now if I execute a process, so I've deployed it and now you'll see that these are the test licenses available are 3. Let me execute this. So go to deployed processes. So this is not still deployed on that Shalini test. So go to deploy page, refresh this. So now if I click on this attachments, I'll see Shalini test. So now let me attach this and deploy the process. Attempted to deploy 4 more standard connections. So what does that mean? Attempted to deploy 4 more standard connections. So now observe this. I will unattach this test atom cloud. Now if I try to deploy this, it is deployed. So what had happened when I attach a test atom cloud to 2 licenses, 2 into 2, 4 licenses are consumed. So you are deploying 2 connections to 2 different atoms. So what is happening? 2 into 2 equal to 4 licenses are being consumed, but we only have 3 licenses available. So by deploying 4, this was exiting by 1 connection license. So that is the error that has come up. This is a very, very important topic and usually asked certification as well as interview question, right? So now you have tried to deploy a process with 2 connections to 2 different atoms. So how many licenses are consumed? There are 4 licenses consumed. Now that this is deployed. Okay. So now if I see the licenses count, so now if I see the licenses count for the test connections, so it have to have the test licenses consumed. So you'll see that purchased are 3 and available are available is 1. So deployed is 2 and available is 1. So which means 2 licenses are not deployed. Now in our scenario, we are doing nothing much, but we are retrieving the files from the in folder to out folder, but we are still referring to the same disk, right? Wouldn't it be good to consume only one license? Because we are being charged based on licenses. So it is always a good practice to consume minimum licenses. Okay, so you should always reuse the connections. You should always reuse the connections. Okay, so we'll try to consume only one connection. Okay, we'll try to make this process to consume only one license. Okay, so now I'll use only one connection. So let me go to disconnection. Okay, I'll remove this directory here. I'll just remove this directory here and out this connection as well. So I'll now have to refer to this connection. I will now refer to disconnection only. And if I go to here parameters, I'll be able to see something called parameters, and I can choose the file filter and directory from here. So directory I'll choose from here and I'll say I'll give the directory path. So copy this and I'll give this here. Similarly, now in order to set a property, so here you can't set the parameters. So this is only for the incoming disk. And now similarly how we set the file name, similarly I can set the directory as well. I'll use a set properties here. I'll say set directory and I will choose disk directory and I will refer to demo files out folder. So by this I can still achieve the same integration. And if I now see how many licenses this is getting consumed, so now you'll see that actually we have deployed to available 1. If I refresh this, see here, I have purchased 3, deployed only 1, and my available licenses are 2. Right? So this is how we can minimize the number of licenses we are using. So whenever you are referring to the same connection, please reuse the connections so that the licenses will be less consumed. So it is always a good practice. Say you are working in a real time in a big project where different people are working on different processes to achieve a single integration. In that case, what we'll have to do, use something called create folder, say common components. So you'll see here my first, so far we were using disk FTP throughout all this day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, correct? So it is always best to have common components folder, create your disk connection here, create your FTP connection here, and reuse them across these folders. So by this, when if I deploy all these processes individually, this will consume more licenses because they are not reused. If I reuse them, whenever processes are, whichever processes are used, if they are reusing those connections, then it will not consume your licenses. Only one deployment will consume one license. Right? So this is how the licenses are consumed. So that's about our day 4 session. So let's get back to our presentation slides. So we discussed about the process life cycle, the deploy tab we have seen, At the management tab, we have seen we have created an environment and we deployed the process. We have executed the process and seen how the process reporting tab looks like. Executed the process and seen whether the process is success or failure, documents coming in, going out, the time, etc. We have triggered a process, scheduled a process. We have seen licensing concept, and with an example we have seen how we can minimize the number of licenses. So we discuss this environment. We are having test environment and production environment. So this consumes test licenses and this consumes production licenses. We have seen with an example how this is consumed, right? Test licenses are cheaper than production. Mail notifications are not received for processes deployed in test environment. Can deploy larger number of data through production. Connection licenses, we have seen the standard and test connectors. They are differentiated as small business, trading partner, enterprise, standard, right? So here you'll see what connectors fall under small business. They are Sage 50, QuickBooks, FreshBooks. These fall under small business licenses. And trading partner, EDI only, enterprise, Oracle e-business suite, SAP. So these connectors come under enterprise. When you deploy these processes with these connectors, enterprise licenses will be consumed, and standard, everything else will consume standard license, right? And the deploy page allows you to deploy these type of independently deployable components: APIs, certificates, custom libraries, flow services, integration packs, process routes, and processing groups. Very important certification question. The connectors that do not affect your license count. So there are few connectors that doesn't consume your license count. So you can deploy them any number of times. You can use any number of times. So they are AS2 shared server connector, Atom Q connector, Atom Sphere API connector, Atom Sphere partner API connector, flow services server connector, MDM connector, MDM listener connector, MLLP server connector, web services server connector, etc. Right? So that's the end of the day 4 session. If you have any queries, please let us know. Thank you.